Ethan froze halfway down the aisle when he saw her face flash across the giant jumbotron. Please welcome the woman who rebuilt half this city's waterfront, Olivia Hart. The ballroom roared. Applause, lights, champagne glasses clinking. Up on the stage, under a shower of gold confetti, she stood in a navy gown, smiling that same soft smile she used to wear when she handed his daughter a napkin at the playground. But tonight, she didn't look like the woman who'd shared a thermos of coffee on a cold metal bench. She looked like the kind of person whose name went on buildings, on trucking depots, on the side of the 18-wheelers he loaded boxes into at 3 in the morning. Ethan's gloved hand tightened around the black trash bag. The neon event staff logo on his polo suddenly felt like a brand stamped on his chest. He backed into the shadows near the service door, heart punching his ribs. He'd been stupid to come stupid to say yes to the extra cleanup shift, stupid enough to think he and Olivia lived in the same world. From the stage, her voice floated out, confident and warm. People like to talk about courage and grit. He couldn't listen. He turned, ready to slip out through the back corridor, when he heard her again, only this time closer. Ethan. He stopped, slowly turned. Olivia. Hart, the woman on billboards and business magazines, was standing 10 feet away, still in her evening gown, looking straight at the man holding a bulging trash bag. You weren't going to leave without saying hi, were you? She asked softly. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from tonight, and hit that like and subscribe button if you believe courage still matters in this world. Ethan Cole was 30 years old and already felt like he'd lived 3 lives. By day, he carried packages and furniture up narrow stairwells all over Cleveland, driving a beat-up box truck for a third-party delivery company that never paid him quite what they promised. By night, 3 times a week, he put on a different shirt clipped on a name badge and pushed a mop bucket through the echoing halls of the Lakefront Convention Center. His apartment was a 2-bedroom walk-up with peeling paint and radiators that clanged all winter. To him, it was a palace. Because in the small back bedroom, under a comforter covered in cartoon planets, slept the whole reason he kept going, his 6-year-old daughter, Lily. Her mom had packed a suitcase and left when Lily was 3. Too tired of the bills, too tired of the second jobs, too tired of always saying maybe next month. Ethan had watched the taillights disappear and promised himself that Lily would never feel abandoned again, even if it meant he never slept. Most mornings started the same way. Alarm at 4:30. Coffee so strong it could walk out of the mug by itself. Packing Lily's little pink backpack with dollar store crayons and a peanut butter sandwich before walking her to the neighbor's place for school drop-off. He was always counting something miles, tips hours, left on the scheduled dollars, left before the rent was due. But he never let Lily see the numbers written on his face. To her, he was just daddy tired, sometimes sure, but always ready to listen to her talk about Saturn's rings or the new girl in her class. On Saturdays, if his schedule lined up just right, they had a tradition. They'd walk 3 blocks down to Riverside Playground, the one with the crooked slide and the view of the river where the big cargo ships slid by like steel mountains. Lily loved that place. That's where Ethan first noticed the woman on the metal bench, wrapped in a plain black coat, hair pulled back flats instead of heels. He didn't know her name. Didn't know there were buildings across town with Hart Properties stamped in 6-foot letters. All he knew was that she laughed at Lily's knock-knock jokes, handed over extra napkins when their juice box exploded, and didn't look at his worn work boots like they meant something about his worth. The real trouble started on a windy October afternoon when a misdelivered package, a familiar last name on a shipping label, and a door he never expected to knock on would crash his world and Olivia's into each other for good. Ethan didn't sleep much after that night at the convention center. He lay awake, listening to the radiator knock behind the wall, and Lily breathe softly in the next room, staring at the ceiling as the picture of Olivia, a heart, in that shimmering navy gown kept replaying in his mind. He kept seeing himself too, standing in the doorway with a trash bag in his hand, sweat on his collar, dirt on his knees. A man who moved boxes for a living. A man who scrubbed other people's footprints off polished floors. A man who had no business imagining someone like her saw him as anything more than a pleasant stranger on a park bench. But the hardest image to shake wasn't from the ballroom. It was from that final moment in the hallway, her standing there calm and steady, looking right at him while he panicked. He hadn't expected her to follow him. He definitely hadn't expected her to care. By Monday morning, he'd convinced himself it didn't matter. Life didn't slow down for questions. He had a delivery route that ran from Old Brooklyn to Eastlake, and the dispatcher didn't care if he'd shared coffee with a billionaire by accident. The real trouble came later that afternoon. He had 2 heavy drop-offs at an office park near the lake. He double-checked the address, hoisted the first box, and leaned his shoulder into the revolving door only to be stopped by a hand pressed against the glass. "You can't bring that through here." A tall man in a crisp shirt and name badge stood blocking his way. Ethan took a step back. "I've got a delivery for Cleveland Dental Group. Freight elevator broken today." The man exhaled through his nose, slow and dramatic. "Of course it is. And of course they send you people through the front. Look, go around back and use the service corridor." "They told me to come through here," Ethan said gently. "And I'm telling you otherwise." The man's eyes flicked over Ethan's worn boots and the patched pocket of his work pants. "We have clients in the lobby. The presentation you're making here isn't ideal." Ethan kept his jaw still. He'd heard worse, sure. But something about the way the guy said "you people" settled into his stomach like a cold stone. He nodded a little, shifted the box against his chest, and walked around the building. Fine. Whatever got the job done. But the service corridor was locked. So were the back doors. He circled the building twice before giving up and returning to the front. The same man stood there, arms crossed. "It's locked," Ethan said quietly. "Then wait for someone to open it." He smirked. "Or try knocking." Something snapped deep down. Not loud, not angry, but something tired. Ethan lifted the box again and backed away. He walked to the truck, set the box down gently, rested his hands on the edge of the truck bed, and exhaled slowly, letting the cold wind sting his face. His phone buzzed. A picture from Mrs. Turner, the neighbor who watched Lily. Lily smiling with missing front teeth, holding up a crooked craft she'd made after school. "Daddy, look, I made a planet. It's Saturn." The caption was full of heart emojis. He steadied himself. She needed him calm. She needed him whole. She needed him to pick her up in 2 hours, with enough patience left to hear about every glitter-covered detail of that paper Saturn. He lifted the box again and walked back toward the front door. And this time, the receptionist, not the man, opened it for him with a sympathetic frown and an apologetic shrug. By the time he finished his route and picked up Lily, he'd pasted on a smile. "How was school, Peanut? I had chocolate milk today. And look, Daddy, I got a gold star because I was extra helpful to Ellie when she dropped her crayons." His heart warmed. She always managed to pull him back from the edge. They walked the 3 blocks home, her skipping him carrying her backpack, and she didn't notice how quiet he was. Or maybe she did, because she slipped her hand into his and held tight. That night, after she fell asleep, the apartment felt too small for all the thoughts crowding his head. He tried to shake off the office park incident, but the next day brought more of the same. A homeowner glared when he walked across her perfectly raked driveway. A manager at a retail store accused him of mishandling a box he hadn't even touched yet. Someone rolled their eyes at him in line at the coffee counter when he paid with a handful of singles. By Wednesday, he was running on fumes and caffeine. The kicker landed right after lunch. He stopped by Riverside Playground to drop off a small package that had been misdelivered. The label had a familiar name, W. Hartson. He hadn't thought much of it. There were a dozen Hartsons in the county, but when he climbed the porch steps, package in hand, the door swung open before he even knocked. And there stood a woman he'd seen on the news once or twice. Blonde hair, sharp eyes, posture straight as a flagpole. "You're the courier." "Yes, ma'am." She looked him up and down with a cool, practiced scan. "I'll take that." He handed her the package. "Have a good day, and tell your dispatch next time to send someone more presentable. We have important neighbors watching this street." He blinked. "Ma'am, I'm just here to... I know exactly what you're here for. Just be mindful. This is a professional neighborhood." He nodded, though every word stung. As he stepped off the porch, he heard another voice from inside the house say, "Who was it?" And the woman answered, "Delivery help. Not the usual kind." He swallowed hard. He tried not to think about who lived in the professional neighborhood. He tried not to think about who else's packages were on these streets. He tried not to think about Olivia. Still, he found himself walking the long way back to the truck. That evening, while he reheated leftover spaghetti, Lily sat at the table drawing with printing paper she'd taken from school. "Daddy," she said, suddenly, "you're sad." He stirred the sauce. "What makes you think that? Your eyes look like when you're thinking too much." She pointed a colored pencil at him. "You think too much when you're sad." He set the spoon down. He didn't want her carrying that weight. "Come here," he said, opening his arms. She climbed onto his lap, small and warm and trusting. He pressed his chin against her hair. "I'm okay," he whispered. "I'm just tired." She hugged him tighter. "You can be tired. I don't mind. I'll still love you." His throat tightened. He held her until the pasta burned. Thursday brought more pressure. His dispatcher added 3 extra stops to his route. His supervisor at the convention center texted that he'd need to come in early Saturday. A landlord notice slid under the door, rent going up in January. Every hit landed in the same sore spot. "You're not enough. You're falling behind. You don't belong in the rooms you step into." By Friday afternoon, he felt it like a physical weight pressing between his ribs. Then came the moment that pushed him toward the edge. He'd just finished a delivery outside a downtown law office when he saw Lily's school calling. His stomach dropped. He answered quickly. "Hello?" A tired-sounding secretary said Mr. Cole Lily had a hard moment today. She's fine, but she got upset during art time. He closed his eyes. "Is she hurt?" No. She just cried a little. She told us another student said something unkind. What did they say, he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. There was a hesitation. Something about her clothes. Something about where she lives. He felt that cold stone in his gut again. But this time it wasn't for him, it was for her. He left work early, flew through traffic, and walked into the school office to find Lily sitting small in a plastic chair, eyes red. She looked up. "Daddy?" He knelt. "I'm here, sweetheart." She buried her face into his neck. He held her close, heart cracking. Later in the truck, after she calmed, she whispered, "Why don't we have a porch like Ellie, or a yard, or a car with heated seats?" He gripped the wheel. He couldn't lie to her. He couldn't tell her everything was fine. "We have each other," he finally said. "And that matters more than any porch." She nodded, but her eyes stayed sad. By the time he pulled into their apartment lot, Ethan felt like his whole world was shrinking around him, pressing him into a smaller and smaller space. He tucked Lily into bed early. Then he sat in the dark kitchen elbows on the table, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. Every part of him felt stretched thin, his patience, his wallet, his hope. He couldn't shake the thought that he and Lily were drifting through a city that didn't want them. That every door he knocked on would have someone frowning on the other side. That every room he stepped into would remind him he didn't belong. He rubbed his face. He didn't know he was reaching the breaking point until the moment his phone buzzed on the table, one message lighting up the screen. A name he'd shoved deep down. A name that stirred everything he'd tried to silence. "Olivia Ethan, are you okay?" He stared at the screen. Outside, a cold wind rattled the window pane. Inside, his heart hammered a warning he wasn't sure he could ignore much longer. Because the pressure he'd been carrying for days, maybe years, was finally cracking. And the next thing that happened would change everything. Ethan stared at the screen until the letters blurred. "Ethan, are you okay?" He could picture her thumb hovering over the send button, hesitating the way she had that day at the park, when she'd almost asked him something deeper, and then pulled back. Part of him wanted to drop the phone in the sink, let the message wash away with the soap and dishwater. Another part of him wanted to type everything he'd been holding in for years. Instead, he set the phone down face down on the table and pressed his palms into his eyes. The radiator hissed. A siren wailed somewhere out on Superior. Wind rattled the one loose pane in the kitchen window. In the back bedroom, Lily shifted and mumbled in her sleep. He picked the phone up again. His thumb hovered. He didn't answer. The next morning, Cleveland woke up to low clouds and a weather alert buzzing across everyone's phones. Severe thunderstorms, gale force winds sweeping in off the lake, possible tornado activity inland. For Ethan, it was just another line of text to work around. He had a double shift delivery route in the morning, then floor crew at the convention center that night. There was a corporate gala booked in the Lakeshore Ballroom, some big real estate event. His supervisor had texted in all caps, "Everybody in. No excuses." He dropped Lily off at Mrs. Turner's with her rain boots and a too small poncho and kissed her forehead twice, just in case. "Will you be late?" she asked. "Probably," he said. "But I'll be there by breakfast, I promise." She nodded like she was memorizing the promise and tucked it away with all the others he'd made. By 7 that evening, the wind was howling around the glass walls of the lakefront convention center. Rain lashed sideways against the windows, turning the view of the harbor into a smear of gray. Inside, it was all polished floors and soft lighting and money. Men in dark suits and women in sleek dresses drifted past the Cleveland Rising banners, balancing tiny plates of food and flutes of sparkling wine. A jazz trio played near the bar. The clink and murmur of rich people networking floated up to the high ceiling. Downstairs in the service corridor that smelled like bleach and machine oil, Ethan pushed a mop bucket toward the freight elevator. Cole, his supervisor, barked. When the main entree comes out, I want you hovering near the east wall. Those investors don't need to see spills. Got it? Got it, Ethan said. And stay out of the photos, the man added without looking back. Last thing we need is a fluorescent vest in the background of some magazine spread. Ethan swallowed the reply that rose to his lips. Yes, sir. He rode the old freight elevator up, listening to the cables hum and the storm boom outside. When the doors slid open, the sound hit him. Music, laughter, the clatter of plates. He slipped behind the partition wall, the invisible line between staff and guests, and took his position against the east wall. He tried not to look, but his eyes found her anyway. Olivia Hart stood near the stage in a simple black dress. This time her hair twisted up a silver bracelet catching the light. No navy gown, no confetti, just a woman talking with a cluster of people who looked very interested in every word she said. Cameras flashed. She didn't see him. A waiter brushed past his shoulder, frowning. Watch the bucket, man. If I slip, they'll fire both of us. Sorry, Ethan murmured, even though he hadn't moved. Time blurred into a rhythm of watching for spills, dodging visible lines of sight, and pretending he couldn't hear the phrases drifting across the room. Quarterly returns, capital stack, billion in assets under management. Olivia, you've outdone yourself. As the main entree was served, the wind outside ramped up. The glass panels shuddered now and then with a deep thud. The jazz trio cut their set short. The event coordinator whispered with the AV crew. Then the lights flickered. Just once, like a warning. People gasped, then laughed it off. The emergency generators kicked in somewhere deep in the building with a cough and a rumble. Ethan's stomach tightened. He knew the building, knew the age of some of its wiring and how often the maintenance team grumbled in the break room. Knew what happened when you mixed a lot of power-old infrastructure and a storm that didn't care how much the tables cost. The keynote started. Olivia took the stage to polite applause, microphone in hand, city skyline glowing on the screens behind her. Cleveland doesn't just need buildings, she was saying. It needs stories. It needs families who believe they belong in the city they call home. Her words barely reached him over the storm. He saw a flash outside the window, too bright to be lightning too close. And then the world jumped. The power went out. All of it. The stage lights, the chandeliers, the glowing exit signs. Everything dropped into darkness so complete it erased the room. There was a collective intake of breath, then a ripple of nervous laughter. Ethan knew the generators would kick in. He waited for the hum. It didn't come. Instead, somewhere under the ballroom floor, something groaned. The air conditioning cut off with a dying wheeze. A moment later, an alarm blared, a low, insistent wail that bounced off the dark walls. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm," someone shouted near the stage. "We're experiencing a minor pop cracked through the room like a gunshot." Then another. Then the sharp chemical smell of burning plastic hit Ethan's nose like a slap. He didn't think. His body remembered the safety training the staff had gotten 3 years ago in a too-hot conference room. Remembered the diagrams. Remembered the fire suppression closets tucked into forgotten corners. He grabbed his flashlight from the utility belt at his hip and thumbed it on. A pale cone of light cut through the darkness. Panic was rising now. Chairs scraped. Glass broke somewhere. Someone screamed. "Fire!" a voice shouted from the far side of the room. "I see flames!" The alarm ramped up into a shrill insistence joined by the strobe flash of emergency beacons finally sputtering to life along the baseboards. Red pulses strobed across hundreds of faces. People surged toward the main doors, clogging the exits in a frightening bottleneck. Ethan swung his light toward the east corner. Above one of the service doors, he saw a faint glow and thin ribbons of smoke snaking from a ceiling vent. Electrical fire in the sub-ceiling. If it hit the wrong cable, this whole ballroom could become a very different story on the morning news. He should have turned and gone with everyone else. Instead, his feet carried him toward the glowing vent. "Sir," a caterer yelled as Ethan pushed past. "What are you doing?" "Fire closet," Ethan barked back. "Tell security the smoke's coming from the east service line." The kid just stared. Ethan shoved through the service door into the maintenance corridor. It was dim lit only by cracked emergency strips and his flashlight. The place always smelled a little stale, but now there was a sharp edge's worth of smoke. He ran the corridor by muscle memory, past the dry storage, past the mop sinks to the red metal cabinet marked Fire Suppression. The lock stuck for half a second. He yanked harder. It came free with a screech that echoed. Inside behind the extinguisher sat the manual cut-off switch for the east electrical line, the one the supervisor had pointed at during training and said, "You'll never need this, but the city likes us to know it's here." Ethan dropped his flashlight to his feet, ripped the panel door open and pulled the handle down with both hands. For a beat, nothing happened. Then, somewhere above him, there was a thunk as the relay snapped. The smoke smell didn't vanish, but it stopped getting worse. He grabbed the extinguisher and sprinted back toward the ballroom. When he shoved the service door open again, chaos slapped him in the face. The crowd had shifted. People were pushing toward the far exits now. A chair was overturned on the stage. One of the side curtains had caught a small lick of flame, climbing its edge near a cable bank where something had clearly overloaded and popped. He saw Olivia on the floor near the front row, trying to steady an older woman who'd stumbled in the dark. The older woman was clutching her ankle face, twisted in pain. A security guard was shouting directions that no one could hear over the alarm and the rising panic. "Back up," Ethan yelled, voice booming out in a tone he didn't know he owned. "Move away from the stage." A few heads turned. Most didn't. He charged through the gap between two tables straight toward the curtain. He remembered the warehouse fire from his warehouse job 3 years ago. The way the flames had crawled up cardboard and reached for the rafters in seconds. The way one co-worker had frozen and another had screamed, and how all that mattered was getting the exit doors open. He hadn't forgotten that smell or that heat. He hadn't forgotten the look on Lily's face when he'd come home late, hair still smelling like smoke, and she'd clung to him like he might disappear. He would not let this room full of people become collateral in another minor incident file. He pulled the pin on the extinguisher as he ran. The flame had climbed higher now, chewing its way up the curtain. Heat licked his face when he got close. He aimed the nozzle low at the base of the fire and squeezed the handle. White foam burst out in a cold rush, swallowing the orange. He swept side to side just like the poster back in the maintenance hallway showed. Smoke bit at his throat. His eyes watered. People were shouting now, some in fear, some in surprise, some in anger that the program had been interrupted. One last blast, and the fire died, leaving a soggy, charred curtain and a smell that would cling to everything for days. He coughed hard, doubled over, then straightened and turned toward the crowd. "Everybody stay calm," he shouted, voice raw. "The line's cut off on this side. Use the west exits. No running. Help anyone who needs it." The security guard stared at him, then seized on the words. "You heard him," the guard hollered. "West exits. Move steady, not fast. Help each other." The panic shifted, refocused. The surge toward the door became a flow instead of a crush. That was when Ethan saw them. 2 kids. One small one, smaller, huddled near a toppled table where the tablecloth had caught on something. The smaller one was crying. The older one was pulling at the cloth with desperate little hands trying to free their trapped foot. The nearest adults were stamping past eyes locked on the exits. Ethan dropped the extinguisher and sprinted. "Hey," he called, dropping to his knees beside them. "Hey, buddy, I got you." The older boy flinched, then recognized the calm in his voice and stilled. "My sister's stuck," he sobbed. "Her shoe. I see it." The metal table leg had twisted when it fell, pinning the edge of the little girl's patent leather shoe. Her face was red and slick with tears. "Take a breath for me," Ethan said, forcing his own voice to stay low and steady. "One big breath, like blowing up a balloon." She gulped, tried, hiccuped. "Good job," he said. "Now we're gonna get you out. Both of you hold my shoulders." They clung to him. He braced his feet, grabbed the table with both hands and heaved. It didn't budge. He shifted his grip muscles, screaming after a 12-hour day, and thought of Lily's small hand in his. Thought of her asking about porches and heated seats and all the things he couldn't give her. He couldn't give her those things. But he could give her this, a father who didn't walk away when it got hard. He dug his heels into the carpet and lifted again with everything he had. The table rose an inch, then 2. Metal scraped against metal. The little girl sobbed harder. "Pull your foot, sweetheart," he gasped. "Now," she yanked. The shoe slipped free, leaving a white sock wrinkled and dusty. He dropped the table with a crash and scooped her up in one motion, the boy clamping onto his shirt. "West exit," he said, mostly to himself now. "We're going to the west exit." He carried them through the thinning crowd, heart hammering. Several people turned to stare. Someone he recognized from glossy ads gaped openly. As they reached the doors, a volunteer took the little girl from his arms, clucking and soothing. A paramedic crouched nearby, ready to check her over. "Daddy." The word cut through everything. Ethan spun around. There she was, Lily in her polka-dot pajama shirt and rain boots hair, wild eyes huge. Mrs. Turner stood behind her face, pale. "The power went out at our place, and she was scared, and I knew you were working here, so we—" But Lily had already flung herself at him. He caught her dropping to his knees, pulling her in so tight he felt her ribs. "You're okay," he whispered into her hair. "You're okay. You're okay. You're okay." Her small arms locked around his neck. "I saw the lights flash," she said into his collar. I thought maybe you were in trouble." He laughed, a shaky, broken sound. "I'm right here, Peanut. I'm okay." When he finally lifted his head, he realized they weren't alone. Guests lined the sidewalk, shivering in the wind and rain. Emergency lights painted everything red and blue. Firefighters strode in and out of the main doors, and a little group of people stood a few yards away watching him. In the center, hair damp from the mist, and dress smudged at the hem, was Olivia. Her eyes weren't the distant, polished eyes of the woman on stage. They were wide, soft, and wet. She'd seen it. All of it. The fire. The kids. The way he'd moved like a man who knew exactly where he belonged when everything was falling apart. He slowly got to his feet, Lily still clinging to his side. For the first time since he'd met her, there was no invisible wall in his mind between her world and his. Because when the lights went out and the room filled with smoke, nobody had asked what his title was. Nobody had cared what his shoes looked like. In that moment, he'd been the only one who knew where the cutoff switch was. The only one close enough, calm enough, stubborn enough to use it. And now, no matter what happened next, that truth hung in the cool, storm-soaked air between them. Olivia took one step forward, then another, her gaze never leaving his. The power in this story had just shifted, and everyone who'd seen him move through the dark knew it. Rain misted across the pavement, drifting in sideways sheets, as paramedics ushered people toward the heated buses idling at the curb. The red strobes from the fire engines pulsed against the wet glass of the convention center, washing every face in flickering color. Ethan still held Lily close, her arms looped tightly around his neck, her cheek pressed to his shoulder. She'd stopped trembling, but her grip hadn't loosened. People were staring. Some whispered. Some pointed toward the darkened side of the building where smoke still curled from the eaves. Others looked at Ethan like they were trying to remember if they'd ever seen him before tonight. He could feel it, the shift, the awareness settling in, the question rising in every mind. Who was that man in the vest who walked straight into the dark? A firefighter jogged toward him, helmet dripping flashlight tucked under one arm. "Sir, you the one who killed power to the east line?" the man asked, wiping water from his brow. Ethan swallowed. "Yeah." I pulled the manual cutoff. The firefighter let out a breath that came out half laugh, half shake. "That relay was about to blow clean through the ceiling. If you hadn't shut it down, we'd be hauling people out on stretchers right now." People nearby overheard. Heads turned. Someone gasped. A woman in a sequin dress placed her hand over her mouth. "He did that." A man in a designer suit murmured. "He knew where the switch was." The firefighter clapped Ethan's shoulder like they were old partners. "Where'd you get training like that?" Ethan opened his mouth and closed it again. He hadn't planned to say anything. Ever. But Olivia stepped closer, her hair sticking to her damp cheeks. Her eyes locked on him with a gentleness that made his ribs tighten. "It's okay," she said softly. "You can tell them." He hesitated. Lily's arms tightened again around him like she knew what was coming. He took a slow breath. Before all this, he said, his voice low, steady. "Despite the storm, I worked at a distribution warehouse on the west side. We stored chemicals, cleaning agents, solvents, flammables. Old building, old equipment." He paused. "We had a fire. Not a big one at first, just enough to set off the alarms. But the emergency lines overloaded, and one of the guys panicked and ran the wrong way." Olivia's breath caught. Ethan looked at the firefighter, then at the people around him. The memory felt like it was unfolding right there on the wet sidewalk. "I pulled the cutoff on that line back then too," he continued. "Got the ventilation open, got my coworker out before the rafters fell." His jaw tightened. He didn't make it. Not long term, smoke damage, lungs never healed. Silence rippled outward. Ethan swallowed again. "That's why I knew what to look for tonight. The smell, the popping in the wiring, the way the air pressure changed. You don't forget that stuff." The firefighter nodded slowly, understanding the kind of experience that couldn't be faked. Someone whispered, "My God." Another murmured, "He saved all of us." A few feet away, the snooty event manager, the same one who'd told Ethan 3 hours earlier to stay out of photos, was staring at him like he'd never seen him before in his life. The man stepped forward, shoulders lowered tone, suddenly fragile. "Sir, I had no idea you." Ethan didn't let him finish. "It doesn't matter," he said simply. But the event manager shook his head, shame written plain on his face. "It does." More people were moving closer now, men and women who normally walked past people like Ethan without seeing them. Their gazes weren't dismissive anymore. They were grateful. A few even looked humbled. Olivia watched it all with a stillness that made her seem carved from the storm itself, soft, steady, unshaken. The kind of presence a person clings to when the world cracks. Lily finally loosened her hold and slid down to the sidewalk. She wiped her face with both hands, then tugged at Ethan's sleeve. "Daddy," she whispered, "are those people talking about you?" Ethan knelt and moved a damp curl from her forehead. "Yeah, Peanut. Because you helped them." "Yes." She wrapped her arms around his neck again, smaller this time, gentler. "I always knew you were brave." That undid him. Not the fire, not the panic, not the shouting or the heat, just that tiny voice whispering into the storm. When he stood again, Olivia had stepped closer, close enough that he could see the raindrops shining on her lashes. "You didn't have to go back inside," she said softly. "I know. You didn't have to run toward the fire." "Yeah. You did anyway." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. She looked at Lily, then back at Ethan. "I've watched you carry half this city on your shoulders," she said quietly. "And you still show up for the people you love." Her voice trembled. "That's who you are." The event coordinator, dripping with rain and embarrassment, hurried over. "Mr. Oosh Cole. The emergency director wants to talk to you. The fire chief, too. They're very interested in what you did tonight." Ethan blinked. "Why, to thank you. Maybe more." The coordinator swallowed. "A lot more." Two firefighters walked over and began asking him questions: what he saw, how he identified the hazard, how he reached the cutoff so fast. As they spoke, the cluster of evacuees around them grew larger. The man in the sharp suit, the one who had earlier dismissed the very idea of Ethan walking through the front doors, stepped forward. "I owe you an apology," he said, voice thick, like he'd swallowed something too big. "Earlier this week at my office, I spoke to you rudely, unfairly. Today I saw the kind of man you are. My behavior was..." He paused, breath hitching. "It was wrong." Ethan blinked slowly. "Okay. You saved my wife tonight," the man added. Ethan's eyebrows lifted. "I didn't know." "You did," the man insisted, without even realizing it. The apology wasn't something Ethan had asked for, wasn't something he needed. But Lily watched the exchange with wide eyes, and something warmed inside him at the thought that she was seeing how wrong people could be and how right they could try to become afterward. As the crowd thinned and evacuees were guided toward the buses, Olivia stepped even closer, her voice soft but carrying through the rain. "There's something you need to know," she said. Ethan braced, suddenly unsure. "I wasn't there tonight by accident," Olivia continued. "This event, the sponsors, the donors, the investments being discussed, half of it was about a program I'm launching." He frowned. "What kind of program?" She hesitated only a moment. "A community-owned redevelopment initiative. Housing, infrastructure, jobs." Her eyes held his. "For people who've been shut out of opportunities because the system pretends not to see them." The words landed like a stone, sinking into a still lake, creating ripples he didn't quite understand yet. Ethan didn't speak. Olivia stepped closer, rain glinting on her cheekbones. And I kept thinking, I need someone who understands hard work. Someone who knows this city from the ground up, not from a boardroom. Someone who sees what gets overlooked. She drew in a breath, voice clear despite the chaos around them. "I need someone like you, Ethan." His heart thudded. He wasn't sure he'd heard right. She continued, "If you're willing, I want you on my team. Not sweeping floors, not hauling boxes, I want your insight on safety logistics community needs. Real work, real pay, real respect. He stared at her. A gust of wind raked across the pavement, blowing her hair across her face. She pushed it back, waiting. Lily slid her hand into his again, leaning into his leg. "Daddy," she whispered. "What's happening?" He didn't have a full answer, but standing there with the storm fading behind him and the glow of emergency lights washing the city in red and blue, he knew one thing. Everything he thought he understood about his place in the world had shifted. Olivia wasn't offering him charity. She was offering him a chance. A door into a world he'd only seen from behind a mop bucket or a loading ramp. A world where people listened to what he had to say. A world where his daughter could grow up knowing her father wasn't invisible. Behind them, the fire engine lights faded as crews wrapped their hoses and packed their equipment. Ahead of them, through the swirling mist, the outline of the city stood waiting, tall, imperfect, full of possibility. Ethan closed his fingers around Lily's hand and breathed in the cold, wet air. A decision was coming. A big one. And for the first time in a long, long while, he felt ready for it. The storm cleared by morning, leaving the city washed and quiet. By the time Ethan finished giving his final statement to the fire department, the sun was bleeding through the clouds in soft orange streaks. The buses that had carried the evacuees were long gone, and only a handful of emergency workers remained. The chaos of the night before had settled into a strange stillness. People approached him one by one. Before leaving, executives, managers, donors, even servers who'd rushed past him earlier without a glance. They shook his hand, thanked him sometimes twice. A few apologized outright for the way they'd treated him earlier in the night. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quieter than that, humble, sincere, unguarded in a way people rarely allow themselves to be. One of the firefighters slipped him a card. "If you ever want to do this work for real," the man said, "you call me. Guys like you don't show up often." Even the event manager, the man who'd told Ethan to stay out of photos, took off his hat when he approached. "I misjudged you," he said simply. "I won't make that mistake again." For the first time in a long time, Ethan didn't feel invisible. And through all of it, Olivia stayed close, never hovering, never pushing, just staying where he could see her. And whenever their eyes met, the look she gave him wasn't pity or surprise. It was something steadier, something that told him she'd known all along there was more to him than a uniform or a time card. Later that week, Olivia invited Ethan and Lily to her office, a tall brick building near the river with floor-to-ceiling windows that made the whole place feel like it was floating. She didn't bring lawyers or assistants. She didn't bring glossy contracts or too big promises. She just poured 2 cups of coffee, set out a juice box for Lily, and walked Ethan through the plan she'd mentioned outside the convention center neighborhood, redevelopments shaped by people who actually lived in the neighborhoods. "You'd be part of the safety and operations team," she said, sliding a folder toward him. "Not a title we hand out because it sounds good. A real position. A voice in meetings. A say in decisions. A paycheck that reflects what you bring to the table." He didn't answer right away. He was thinking about bills, about Lily's school lunches, about the sense of dread he felt every first of the month. But more than that, he was thinking about how, when the power had gone out and panic took over, he hadn't frozen. He hadn't waited. He'd stepped up because that's who he was. He looked across the desk at Olivia, at the steadiness in her eyes, and nodded. "I'll do it," he said. She smiled, small and warm. "Good. I was hoping you'd say that." The months that followed were nothing short of transformative. Ethan still worked hard, harder than he'd expected. But for the first time in years, the work didn't feel like survival. It felt like purpose. He sat in meetings with engineers and planners. He toured old buildings destined for renovation. He pointed out hazards no one else saw, details they'd overlooked, shortcuts that would have put people at risk. And every time he spoke, people listened. Lily noticed the difference first. "You smile more," she said one morning as she buttered her toast. "Your eyes don't look tired all the time." He didn't know what to say, except the truth. "I feel different, sweetheart." As spring turned into summer, one of the rebuilding projects opened an after-school center on Cleveland's west side. On the day it opened, dozens of families showed up. So did city officials, volunteers, neighborhood kids who finally had a place to go after the bell rang. Ethan stood near the entrance with Lily on his hip, as Olivia gave the opening speech, not from a stage, but standing among everyone else. "This center exists because of the people who believed this neighborhood deserved better," she said. "One of them is standing right beside me." She gestured toward Ethan. He felt his ears burn. He set Lily down and tried to wave it off, but people were already clapping. Neighbors he'd never met, kids who didn't know his name, parents who'd heard pieces of the story from someone who'd been at the convention center that night. Someone shouted, "Thank you, man." Another yelled, "We appreciate you." Lily tugged his sleeve. "Daddy, they're clapping for you." He nodded, chest tight. "Yeah, I guess they are." Olivia stepped closer and leaned in quietly. "You earned this." A year later, you wouldn't have recognized his life. Not because of money, he wasn't rich, not in the way Olivia was. But the fear had faded. The weight had eased. There were more good days than bad ones. His apartment was a little brighter. Lily had a bigger backpack and a steadier confidence. And Ethan carried himself like a man who finally understood the worth he'd always had. Olivia and Ethan never rushed whatever was growing between them. It happened the way most good things do, slowly, quietly, naturally. Two families that had spent years drifting found a place where their roads crossed, and stayed crossed. On Friday evenings, the three of them would walk down to the river. Lily would skip ahead, shouting at the boats, and Ethan would fall into step beside Olivia, their hands brushing, then linking, then staying linked without a word. And on nights when the city lights shimmered on the water and the wind blew just right, he'd think back to that dark ballroom, the flames licking up the curtain, the terrified faces, the weight of two small hands clutching his shoulders as he pulled them away from danger. He didn't step up that night because he wanted applause or gratitude or a better job. He stepped up because he'd made a promise to himself, to a little girl sleeping in a room down the hall, to the memory of a coworker he couldn't save. A promise to never look away when someone needed help. And in the end, that promise carried him into a life he never thought he'd be allowed to have. Some stories begin with a disaster. Others begin with a moment of courage nobody expects. And sometimes the life you're meant for doesn't arrive with fanfare. It arrives quietly, like a hand reaching for yours in the dark, guiding you toward a new beginning. Because courage doesn't just change the moment. Sometimes it changes everything.